Hi, my name is Tim Atseff. I'm supposed to be an artist. In my mind, it goes round and round and round. And sometimes I feel like I have a third eye. And I see things others can't. Well, welcome to my world. Hello. Yes, my name is Tim Atseff, and I too am an artist. That other fellow was my alter ego. He's a little weird. What that means is the depth of my self-involvement runs very, very deep. So forgive me if I become a little too self-indulgent. But I guess that's what art is all about anyway. I'm sending this dispatch from my home in Syracuse, New York. So welcome. I'm sure many of you are not familiar with my work, nor should you be. So I'd like to share a little bit about my background and who I am, what I do as an artist, and a little bit about how I got to this point in my life. First off, I'm not one that's fond of labels, but for the purposes of this talk, I'd say my work falls in, let's say, 3 categories. 1, existential, 2, political, and 3, representational. I'm going to deal with 2 of the 3. The existential and the political, and where the 2 intersect. As we go along, you're going to see some of my existential work and some of my political cartoons for context, because they're used as the base for my 7 deadly sins. Look, life is filled with challenges. According to Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of those great challenges is to know enough about a subject to know that you are right, but not enough to know you are wrong. I'm a big believer in learning your limitations, but always pushing the limits. With that, a little bit about me. I grew up in Syracuse and I stayed in Syracuse. I guess I'm a homeboy. I'm all about creating things. We all create things in some manner. Every morning we get up, you create yourself. The way you dress, the way you comb your hair, the way you put your makeup on, the way you solve everyday problems. All of this regardless if you're a type A or a type B personality, or if you're more left brain, the critical thinker side, or the right brain, the more creative leaning side. The left side that makes you more orderly and deadline sensitive, and the right side that gives you that carte blanche to pull certain things off in life. Me? I guess I lean heavily to the right side. One's creativity is no more evident than when we were children. That's when we were all at the height of our uninhibited capacity for creating. With that finger paint. It didn't matter to you if you stayed on the paper, or you smushed the paint all over the wall, or the table, or the floor. You were free to do whatever you wanted. Free is the operative word. But at some point came the voice of authority. No. Stay on the paper. Don't make such a mess. Stay in the line. That was the beginning of the end for creativity and the rise of order. I'm all for order, but it can rob you of the excitement of discovery, and it can certainly become a creativity killer. I've spent 7 decades coloring outside the lines, at home, in school, and during my professional career, just looking for a balanced life. And part of a balanced life is working some, playing some, but creating a lot. But unfortunately, at some point, most of us lose that special feeling and our personality traits begin to sort themselves out. Over time, my doodling in the margins matured into more academic and figurative work. I wouldn't say I was much of a student. I was, however, pretty good at daydreaming and doodling, good enough to graduate from college, and good enough to have a career at the Syracuse newspaper for 46 years. A career where I was forced, by need, to use my creativity in a more literal, intentional, and yes, orderly fashion. When I was a teenager, my father, who emigrated from Macedonia in the 1920s, gave me some very simple and direct advice. Just do your best at whatever you're doing, and do it like you give a damn. It wasn't a complicated man, but his advice taught me that without a healthy work ethic, your skills are frankly worthless. So really, it's a good life when you can make a difference by doing what you have a passion for. I found my passion was in creating things. It didn't matter whether it was managing a newsroom, engaging readers in news stories, creating a magazine, mowing the lawn, drawing cartoons, coloring Easter eggs, or painting. To me, it's all art. I discovered the power of art is in the response, that art is louder than words, and that the more personal the art, the more it reveals of oneself and the mysteries and the chaos of life. Other lessons are that love is stronger than death, and the contrast of life and death make life worth living, and that myth is more potent than reality, and that the search for my new reality comes out, and the painting is the portal. Now, if you haven't noticed yet, my work tends to be on the dark side. The darker the work, the more alive I feel. It's really hard for me to be doing something that's joyful. Not that I can't, it just doesn't come natural. Sometimes I'm asked, are you a realist or a surrealist? I answer that I'm a realist and a sentimentalist when it comes to my path along this life's journey, but a surrealist about the existential question of what lies beyond, if anything. That question is sometimes followed by, are you sad when you paint? I answer, no, not really, but it helps. The most frequent question I get is, I don't understand what's going on here. Well, that's not my job. My job is to create a new reality. It's not about you understanding something. It's about you experiencing the painting and penetrating your own experience, not my experience. I ask back, when you hear Wagner or Bach or Jimi Hendrix' Star Spangled Banner, do you try to understand that, or does it just move you? Take a look at art in isolation, alone. Looking at the painting. Hello in there. Is anybody home? Experience it. Feel the response. And if there's nothing, move on. Look, I'm not trying to provide some intentional fallacy or something. What I am saying is my interpretation of what's on that canvas shouldn't steer someone else to the same conclusion. It's my interpretation. Whether someone sees it the same way is none of my business. Then there's the question of how do you categorize your work? Is it surreal? Is it grotesque? Is it expressive existentialism? Or what? How would I know? How would anybody know? There are so many isms in art, it drives me nuts. There's impressionism, post-impressionism, realism, fauvism, cubism, futurism, dadaism, surrealism, existentialism, abstract expressionism, modernism, postmodernism, post-postmodernism, pop art, pointillism, superrealism, hyperrealism, masso-realism, neo-expressionism, grotesquism, animalism, stuckism, primitivism, ismism, and there's 100 more. Who made up these things? But they do, and I guess that too is being creative, just like artists create art. These people create words. I just call my stuff Atseff. So where does what is on the canvas come from? Sometimes it comes from a nightmare, from a dream, from something deeply embedded in my experience, some sort of Proustian existentialism, if I had to frame it that way. They are ideas and images that are so powerful, yet fleeting, that if I don't act on them right away, they evaporate, waiting for another sensory trigger. A word, an image, a smell, a taste, a touch, a noise, a song, a voice. Maybe it's just something I see that others don't. Sometimes I don't see what others do. And that's what makes art ethereal. It's sometimes like chasing smoke. One thing I can say is the older I grow, the faster I paint. Too many images, too many canvases, and so little time. So what about the tactile process I use in my work? Forget about the kind of paint I use, the size of the brushes. Not important. Not important at all. It's about my soul, my heart, my brain, and the work ethic I bring to the experience. The rest will take care of itself. When I have some not fully formed idea in my head, I have to start somewhere. So I throw down a splash of paint or a brush stroke, and then another and another, until it begins to reveal something of myself through some sort of alignment of the figurative and the abstraction. Maybe I was trying something with that brush stroke and it turned into something totally different than I ever thought of. Other times, it's more deliberate, like the 7 deadly sins. Regardless, it's a continuous play of figuration and abstraction, of reality and a new reality. And the most difficult question is, when are you done with a painting? How do you know? That's the challenge. That knowing when to stop. For me, it's done when something is complete enough to go beyond its immediate impact, and it grabs the viewer by the collar and pulls them closer into the painting so they can dive deeper into its part and then back out again. The painting's life reveals by creating an eye movement through the painting at a distance. As the viewer gets closer, a front to back movement that reveals the details that become otherworldly. So kind of like I draw small but paint big, always revealing to the viewer something of their own experience. Maybe it's repulsion, maybe it's revulsion, maybe it's fascination, but in the end, it should evoke some sort of reaction. One of the other questions I get is, why do I paint? Now, that is a curious question. I can tell you why I don't paint, and I don't paint for money. It's never been a motivation. Money and art have nothing to do with each other. I feel if you compromise your work for money, then what's the point of being an artist? It takes you somewhere else rather than where you really want to go. Frankly, I'd rather ask myself, how do I breathe life into a canvas? When the viewer looks into the canvas, how do I make the soul and the eyes of what I've created look back at the viewer and touch them in some way? I paint for my benefit, in my space, in my time, creating something that moves beyond the subject by manipulating chance, bearing the mysteries of pain, of life, passing to death. It's some sort of exorcism of my fears and anxieties. Like I said earlier, the darker I paint, the more alive I feel. I feel my paintings are doorways to lost memories from the past and trying to remember the future. The fact of the matter is, we lay down with death. We all lay in bed with both realities, life and death simultaneously. It is that, and the mystery of the universe, and what lays beyond, to me, that is intriguing. Sometimes the blank canvas is just a metaphor of life. Language and words are too small, inadequate, and limited for full exploration. That's why I turn to art and its power to tap into my imagination. So where does all this darkness come from? It comes from the crazy chaos of the world, and it's my way of coping with it. From a child getting lost, watching the clouds and wondering what lies beyond, to the duck and cover diving under the school desk drills of the 1950s, when the specter and visions of being vaporized gripped the nation's children, to running through the streets through the fog of tear gas during the Vietnam War protests, and waiting for the draft lottery to send me off as cannon fodder for a war I didn't believe in. And the hastened drip, drip, drip of news reports of senseless deaths, like Newtown's mass shooting of children, and the seemingly insatiable appetite of man's inhumanity to man. Then there's the personal pain of deep mourning, of family and contemporary deaths. They were all mortal, after all. It is that clarion call of my own mortality that is getting louder and more focused as the years press on. For we are all mortal, after all. The artist Paul Klee once said, "I paint so I don't cry." I'd add, I paint so I don't die. It's all that remains. That is why the darker my paintings are, the more alive I feel. Now I'd like to take this time to move to a transition, to visit this fellow here and his 6 friends down in the basement studio. Let's go. Whoa! I don't know whether to snap to attention, sit down, or get up and run. Well, here we are in my studio, and here is where the hocus pocus happened. I know the talk of Donald Trump can be exhausting to the point of delirium. Just try to count down the seconds since someone brought up his name. But that's the thing. It's like his clammy bone crusher of a too close handshake. It pulls you back in whether you want it or not.
Nobody knows the game better than I do.
Nobody knows it better than me.
Nobody knows politicians better than I do.
Nobody knows more about taxes than I do.
Nobody knows more about debt than I do.
Nobody knows the system better than me.
It is down here where I retreated to visually vent the lunacy of the Never Never Trumpland's news cycle to come up with the 7 Deadly Sin series. While a detour from my existential work, it was my way of coping with the believe me or your own eyes zombie seduction coming from the White House. Political art is not new to me. It has the power to motivate for good and for evil. As a one-time political cartoonist, I like to think I upheld the tradition for good. Some people may quibble with that, though. So I will share some of my political cartoon work with you. That discipline and my existential paintings serve as the ingredients for the brew that is the 7 Deadly Sins. I think it's important to put this in the context that I give you a quick recap of my professional career as a newsman and my stint as a political cartoonist. I started work at the Herald Journal when I was in college in 1965. The Herald was the afternoon newspaper in Syracuse. My first job was as a copy boy in the newsroom, a gopher, getting coffee, ripping wire copy from the news desk as news broke over the Associated Press and United Press International wires. It didn't take me long before I caught the newsroom fever, listening to the clickety-clack of teletype machines and manual typewriters, ringing phones, screaming police scanners, the barking of crusty old editors, and the smell of printer's ink in the fog of cigarette smoke. This, I thought, was a life for me, and I began to have ink course through my veins. At the time, I was majoring in painting at Southern Illinois University. After graduation, I was hired full-time to work in the art department. For the next 46 years, I held the positions of illustrator, designer, art director, deputy managing editor, marketing and new product development manager, and magazine editor. It was the only paycheck I've ever drawn. I've been around. Now, speaking of drawing, early in my career, I concurrently spent time filling the 7 by 5 inch space on the editorial page with political cartoons lampooning local, state, national, and international politicians. There was no on the other hand of a written editorial. In a blink of an eye, it had to either cut like a scalpel and, when necessary, bludgeon like a mace. Political cartooning has a long and rich history, from Daumier to Goya, Dolly, Nast, and Herblot. Boss Tweed, the infamous politician in New York, said it best in 1878 when talking about the power of Thomas Nast cartoons. He bellowed, "I don't give a straw for your newspaper articles. My constituents can't read, but they can see those damn pictures." The downside of all of this is, outside of a show at the Emerson Museum in the 1970s, this was my dead period for painting. Raising a family, an all-consuming career left little time and oxygen in the studio. As my responsibilities at the newspaper increased, I reluctantly shed my cartooning responsibilities. My last role at the newspaper was to create and serve as the editor of 3 regional magazines: Central New York Magazine, Central New York Business Exchange, and Central New York Sports Magazine. In 2011, I walked out of the newspaper building for the last time, after 46 years into a new chapter. Some people call it retirement. I call it rewirement. It was the right time for me to step away because I felt I'd done the best that I could, and I did it like I gave a damn. I also figured the past is short, but the future is getting even shorter. And I still had some gas in my tank. So I rewired myself back to where my passion for creativity began, with painting. Back to my studio in the basement. It is here, in this room, where I could paint when I wanted to, paint with no expectations, and paint with no audience. Alone, isolated in this dark space, listening to the music of my times. Now that is therapy. Here I am surrounded with the chaos that has been my life. I am comfortable and at peace down here. It has been my refuge in the age of Trump. It has also been my laboratory to vent my frustration and anger and the astonishment of daily dispatches from Trump's Tower of Babel.
The numbers are astronomical.
Ever-growing numbers.
Numbers that you've never seen before. Numbers that nobody has ever seen. Numbers that you wouldn't even think are believable.
Unbelievable numbers.
A massive number. It's a ridiculous number.
A place where I could experiment with my political cartoon skills and my painting background. Put the two together and you get what one could call, political art tunes instead of political cartoons.
We have a great country. It'll be greater than ever before.
You know the saying after 9/11, when you see something, say something. Well, I had seen enough, so I started painting something. It was a type of kenosis, a purging of angst. Just me and my canvas and paint that was the gasoline, and Trump the match. Poof! Trump isn't a failure because he's a Republican. It's because he's a bad human being. It is because he is the full embodiment of the 7 deadly sins: greed, wrath, envy, sloth, lust, gluttony, and vanity. So what began as one painting grew into a series of paintings that transcended politics. Trump and his band of feckless lemmings under his spell have been assaulting the objective truth on a daily and almost minute-to-minute basis. They are complicit, corrupt, immoral, amoral, lacking any semblance of moral compass. Perhaps this Trump, the deal maker, never read Goethe's Faust. That Faustian bargain didn't work out so well either.
Billions and 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 billions and.
You know, I said to myself, how in the hell are you going to fit all that into one painting? It was back in 2018 that Art Rage Gallery had a call for art in the age of Trump. At that time, I had completed one of the sins, and I wasn't really attempting to do all 7. But I answered the call and was in the show. What I found was that one spawned another, that spawned another, and then the imagery just kept flowing and flowing and flowing. And I said, why stop? At the same time, the Center for Political Contemporary Art in Washington, D.C. showed interest in the series. The center bills itself as the editorial page of the art world. What a perfect match, I thought. My work and that of 2 others were shown in 2019. Art Rage then scheduled the full series for the spring of 2020. Unfortunately, as you know, COVID-19 sent everyone home to shelter in place. Hence, this preview of the 7 Deadly Sins show. If you remember, Trump began his term with an inaugural speech that was defiant, populist, anti-establishment, and by describing America as dark, dangerous, and dystopian, a nation under siege from foreign competitors and Muslim terrorists, and which had been screwed up by some deep state. How prescient about the dark and dangerous dystopian part. Only he can break it. And ended up today presenting America with an existential threat to our democracy and our institutions, as destructive as COVID-19. I rolled into the 7 Sins series like a Trojan horse, filled with a wide array of subversive stereotypes and cliches, tools I had stored away in my political cartooning days, and I unleashed them in each of the paintings, giving a glimpse into my interpretation of Trump's soulless Hulk. One of those visual cues is the use of animals, an art form that goes back to the Neanderthals, scratching images on cave walls. The animalism genre has always played a role in political cartooning. Think donkeys and elephants. And in the history of art. Finding the perfect match for Trump was not difficult. The pig. Why? Pigs carry these negative connotations. They are lazy, overindulgent, lustful, cunning, and greedy. Pigs also have a herd mentality. And when it comes to the trough, what do? No, we know what Trump does, and he's always at the trough. As you make your way through the series, you'll find the use of emojis as a spectrum of emotions swirling like his tweets. You'll see the use of the American flag hung in distress. You'll see 3 crowns: the royal crown, the jester's cap, and the crown of thorns, fitting for a false prophet and one who is self-anointed and has been called the chosen one. And other imageries that is obvious, and others not so much so. Unfortunately, my need to vent didn't end with painting the 7 Deadly Sins, and it yielded 5 more paintings. The Mueller report sparked Redact and We versus I, and the Crown of Thorns. Perversions of our Constitution. The impeachment vote in the Senate revealed the subversion of the world's greatest deliberative body, toadies, housed in a toilet bowl of the Trumpian throne. And 100 seconds to midnight, the tick-tock of the doomsday clock. Truly, Trump embodies each one of the 7 deadly sins. Now, lest there be any confusion, I committed to this project focusing on the 7 deadly sins only after I exhausted a search for the virtues. The virtues of temperance, charity, chastity, diligence, humility, and kindness. In those, I found none, nada, zero, zip. All I found was a soulless hulk of a clown. Now, I'd like to present what Trump has wrought, the 7 deadly sins, a Trump dystopian heptology. So there you have it, the 7 deadly sins. Look, I don't mean to be political. Oh, yes I do. All presidents, all human beings have flaws. But Trump departs from all presidents in that he is unable to control his day trading impulses as a grifter. And who's the poorer for it? We are. Not because of his policies of his administration. We can deal with policies. But what he has done to dismantle and pervert our democracy, civility, and the justice system, and institutions like the Fourth Estate. Those are the guardrails which have made America so unique in the world. I'm Tim Atseff, and I am an artist. I use a color palette that is dark and sometimes violent. As I go, I am additive and at the same time subtractive. It's a state of mind. Art is meant to make you think. And the power of the art is in the response. In the end, it's up to you.
billions and 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 billions.